a series called Red Letter. I'm excited to get to close that out today. And if you haven't been with us throughout this series, just a real quick recap. In week 1, we spoke from the subject, love your neighbor. And week 2, we did seek first, about seeking first the kingdom and reprioritizing. How many of you know that it's important to get your priorities in line? And it seems like when we align our priorities, everything just seems to work out a little bit better. Then week 3, we talked about Jesus the healer. And how many of you know that Jesus is the healer? I believe that week 3, we saw healings at all campuses across all locations because Jesus is the healer. And then last week, we answered the question, what is a disciple? And so if you've missed any part of the series, what I want to encourage you to do is I want to encourage you to go back and listen to it. This has been an amazing series. I know if you've been here, you would say that, man, I've gotten so much out of this series. I believe that this series can be transformational for your life as a follower of Jesus. But I'm going to close out week 5 of this series, and I want to speak to you from the title today, Come to Me. Come to me. If you would turn with me real quickly to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, and we're going to look at verses 28 through 30. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It says, Then Jesus said, Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. I want to read from another translation, the Message translation, because I believe it brings some of these truths across even stronger. In the Message translation, it says it this way. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Can we agree in here this morning that religion will burn you out? But there's rest found in relationship. How many of you know that to be true? That religion, it'll burn you out. But there's rest in relationship. He says, come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. To learn the unforced rhythms of his grace for my life, to have rest in a world that is restless, that we can actually have rest. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my phone. How many of you rely on your phone quite a bit? I think a lot of us would say that we do. It's 2019, about to be 2020, and so a lot of us do. For some reason, on this one particular night, usually I charge my phone at night. Anybody else, you use it all day, charge it at night. So I usually charge my phone at night, but this one particular night, I didn't actually charge my phone. And, it was a rough time. I was probably doing something. I don't remember what I was doing, probably something really spiritual like devotions. But more likely online shopping. You know what I mean? It was just one of those nights where the deals were good and was just out there getting them. And so I didn't charge my phone, and I woke up in the morning with my battery on red. Have you ever dealt with the frustration of trying to go through an entire day of work with your phone on red? Have you ever dealt with this? The struggle is real. It's a little bit therapeutic to get this out in front of all of you because it is a struggle to get through a day. I remember going through that day just trying to find chargers and outlets and trying to keep my phone charged up in case I got a call so that I didn't miss the call. And I got the sense while I was preparing for this weekend that some of us, our life is in this same state where we're running on red. We're running on red, and every single day feels like a struggle. Every single day feels like a grind. You're just trying to make it through from station to station, from stop to stop through life, and it feels like a complete grind. It makes sense because in our culture today, people have never been more tired. They've never been more exhausted, never more stressed out, never more restless than right now in this day that we're living in. The problem with that is that the church has fallen into the same trap that the world has fallen into. There's this thing in our culture that says you've got to go more. You've got to do more. You've got to be more. You've got to keep moving forward. Constant movement, constant pressing, constant stressing, constantly going. And in a world where we're called to be countercultural, in a world where we're called to stand out, we as followers of Jesus have been just as stressed out. But I believe the good news in here this weekend is that Jesus came to give us something different. Jesus said, I have something different. I have something better for you than what this culture is offering. The restlessness, the stress, the exhaustion. Jesus is saying, are you tired? Are you weary? Are you exhausted? Are you stressed? Come to me. He says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. The word rest here, if you study it out in the Greek, it actually means rest. It means to relax. It means to be refreshed. If you look at the root of that word rest in the Greek, it actually says to pause, a break in the action, to get away for a break. And I believe that Jesus, he's saying to us this morning that the way that this culture is going, it is a never-ending cycle of busyness, of stress, of being overwhelmed, and of being restless. But if you'll come to me, if you'll learn my way of doing things, I have a better way for you. It's a way where you can take on my rest, where you can start to experience real rest. You don't have to live the way our current culture does. In fact, you've been called to live countercultural. So I want to talk to you today about a few ways from this topic, how to go from stressed to rest. I want to talk to you today just about a few ways that we see biblically that we can go from stress to rest. Because how many of you believe in here today that God has something different for us? That God has something better for us? That in a world that is restless, that we can experience his rest. In a world that is stressed out, we can stand out because we don't just blend in with the way that they're going. The first thing that I want to share with you is to enter his presence. Enter his presence. We all know this, that when we enter his presence, there's an exchange that takes place, that we trade what we lack for all that he is. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my phone again. I do this a lot because I'm a millennial, and it's what we do, think about our phones. And so I was thinking about my phone again, and I was thinking, on my phone, I download apps. Anybody else? You download apps? Some of you know, you're like, never, apps are of the devil. I download apps. Why? Because there are so many benefits to downloading apps. It's easier. It's more convenient. It's easy to navigate. Like, you no longer have to search for what you were searching for long. You can just click a button. And for a simple-minded person like me, that sounds pretty good. Like, I don't like if there's too many steps, it just gets too difficult. Anybody else in here? Like, you're the type that when you go to put something together like a piece of furniture, you're just instantly overwhelmed, too many steps. That's why I need apps. And so it's easy, it's just easy access. And here's what I believe today in church. I believe that there is a divine download that we can get when we enter his presence. That there is a divine download that you and I need to get daily. And what happens? What do we get when we go ahead and access this divine download? I believe one of the most important things that we gain through the divine download is we gain his perspective. His perspective. We need his perspective in our lives. I wonder how many of us have been lacking the right perspective. And it's interesting to me that with perspective, sometimes we get so caught up in where we're not that we fail to really appreciate where we are. It seems like sometimes we have a wrong perspective on the place that we're in. Maybe for some of you, it's the job that you're in. When you have a wrong perspective, you'll never truly appreciate the place. You'll constantly try to push your way out of the place because you think this can't possibly be where God has me. But here's what I've found. When you gain a godly perspective, there's something that shifts. And I wonder how many of us have lived in a constant state of discontentment in our lives because we've failed to see God's perspective on our current place. See, I believe that's why Paul wrote Timothy, who Timothy was his understudy. Paul wrote Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, and he says, godliness with contentment, it's great gain. It's great gain. So godliness, his way of doing things, his way of seeing things, and then contentment, it's great gain. See, I believe that Paul had learned something. Paul had learned to be content in every season of his life. He goes on to tell Timothy some of the traps, some of the temptations, some of the dangerous desires that we can get. He goes on to list some of those, and he talks about money and possessions and some of the things that we so restlessly chase in our culture. And basically the bottom line is this, that until our pursuit is Jesus and his presence, we'll always fail to have a right perspective. Until our pursuit is Jesus, we'll fail to have a right perspective. Because perspective, man, it changes everything. When I get his perspective on where I'm at, it'll change the way that I view it completely. But with a wrong perspective, even blessings feel like burdens. See, some of you, the things that you prayed for, now you have them and all you do is complain about them. Some of you might have been believing for a job a year ago, and now you have the job, and all you do is complain about the job. And I want to present a transformational thought for you. Maybe it's not the place that needs to change. Maybe it's your perspective that needs to change. This is important because we live in a culture today that says, well, I don't like it, just get another one. If you don't like your job, just get another one. If you don't like your spouse, just get another one. If you don't like your church, just get another one. Maybe the problem isn't the place. Maybe it's our perspective. We've got to get a hold of this because this will cause us to view difficulties differently when we have a right perspective. We'll start to view difficulties as maybe this is actually a setup for my destiny. See, instead of just every time we face difficulties, and I'm not talking about sickness, I'm not talking about disease, I'm not talking about abuse in your marriage, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about sometimes in our culture, we've become a little bit weak. When we face any resistance, when we face any difficulty, we flee the scene because it's got to be the place that needs to change. It's got to be the place that I'm in that I just have to get out of this place. But can I encourage you and challenge you with this? That even if you leave the place, you go wherever you go. And chances are the same difficulty you're facing here, you're gonna face there. But so quickly we blame the place because we haven't gotten into his presence and gotten that download of his perspective for our lives. But when we get into his presence, that's why it's so important that this is daily, because we get his perspective in that divine download. And then we view our difficulties differently. We view our difficulties as maybe this difficulty is something I'm walking through because it's supposed to develop something in me. See, we start to have a little bit of perseverance. And we persevere through the difficulty knowing this is gonna develop something. I need this difficulty to achieve its purpose in me. And I'm talking about difficulties like personalities at your job. Like that person that you think about that you're like, I can't stand, they just get under my skin. I don't use the word hate, I'm a Christian, I don't use that word, but they get under my skin. You start to view those difficulties differently as maybe this is pruning me. Maybe it's preparing me. Maybe it's producing something. Maybe the difficulties that I'm facing are for development, because God has to develop some things in me so that he can fulfill his destiny for my life through me. There is something in this season that I need. I don't know about you, but I need his perspective on my job. I need his perspective on my marriage. I need his perspective on my church. I need his perspective, because when I get his perspective, all of a sudden, man, something shifts and I start to see things a whole lot differently. I start to see from a larger point of view. How many of you know that God's thoughts, the Bible says his thoughts are higher, his ways are higher than our ways? How do you close the distance? By time in his presence and his word. And I think too often we go with our small-minded thinking instead of getting a godly perspective on the place that we're currently in. I wonder how many of us, it would do us good to get a godly perspective. If Jesus isn't your pursuit, then you're always gonna lack perspective. See, Jesus is the only thing that's gonna satisfy your soul. He's the only thing. See, your satisfaction, your rest, your lack of stress isn't found in a place. It's found in a person. It's found in Jesus. And until we realize that only he satisfies, only he fulfills, only he truly is the one that we can draw all of the strength that we need from, we're gonna lack something in our lives. We're gonna constantly go chasing the same things that this world goes chasing, when we could just be pursuing the one who holds it all in his hands. He knows the end from the beginning. Come on, how many of you believe that he holds your destiny? That he can do in 50 seconds what would take you 15 years. He is God. And he's a miracle worker, but he's waiting on us to pursue him and get his perspective on where he currently has us, because then we're gonna go ahead and realize that we're actually in this thing together with him, that he's actually wanting to do something in and through us in that place. I wanna ask you this really quickly, because here's what happens when we get a godly perspective. We learn how to align our priorities. Wonder how many of us have taken on things because our priorities were out of whack. We were chasing after the wrong thing. So we've taken on things that were never meant to be on our plate anyways. So I want you to ask yourself, man, what am I doing that God never asked me to do? But more importantly, sometimes it's not that you're doing too much. Sometimes it's not what you're doing at all. Sometimes it's not that you need to do less. Sometimes it's not that you need to change the thing you're doing, it's you need to change how you're doing it. Here's what I've realized in my own life. That less, when he says, hey, I'm gonna give you, or lighter, when he says, I'm gonna give you a lighter load, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. When he says light there, in my life at least, light doesn't always mean less. Light sometimes just speaks to how I'm carrying what it is that he's called me to carry. I think this is important because when he says, come to me, all of you who are weary, in verse 28, and carry heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest. That word heavy burdens, actually in the King James, they use the phrase heavy laden. And heavy laden, it paints this picture of just something that is a load that isn't uncommon. It's not an uncommon load. In fact, it's a load that you'd expect somebody to carry if they're living life. And actually it represents a soldier back in that time who carried a soldier's backpack, who carried the backpack that a soldier carries. So it wasn't unexpected. It wasn't out of the ordinary. It was actually an ordinary load to carry. And so Jesus is saying, hey, as you're carrying this load on your journey, as you're carrying this on your journey, here's the deal. I don't want you to carry it on your own. See, I believe that as we get into his presence and we have a divine download, our perspective starts to change. We start to realize our dependency on him. That we were never meant to just depend on our strength. We were meant to tap in to his strength. See, there is a divine empowerment for the place that God has you in. There's an empowerment. It's his ability. Which brings me to the second thing, which is engage in a partnership. Engage in partnership. See, Jesus has called us and he's saying, hey, come to me, Get in my presence, get my perspective so that you understand that your whole life is a partnership with me. We see in the Bible time and time again, it says that we're laborers together with God. And I wonder how many of us have gotten caught up doing things for God and we've forgotten that we're actually supposed to do things with God. We're supposed to do them with God. See, the word yoke, when he says my yoke is easy, my burden is light, yoke speaks to a wooden piece that would bind two animals together. It would bind the animals together because what one of them couldn't pull on their own, when they were bound together, they could pull it with ease. And they would stay bound together, and there was strength in them being bound together. Can I encourage you in this place? That your strength is found in being bound to Jesus and being in a partnership with him. So he's saying, I want you to be yoked together with me. I want you to be in this partnership with me. It's so vitally important that you stay linked to me. Why? Because I'm gonna help you to take those steps that you need to take, even when it feels heavy. See, I can make it light again because you're not just doing this for me, you're doing it with me. It's not your strength that you're operating in, it's actually my strength. It's my empowerment. It's my equipping for you to do what it is that I've called you to do. And I found that the only way to properly walk step in step with Jesus is to be led by his Spirit through that divine download every single day of our lives, because sometimes we want to keep striving, but we're just supposed to be stepping step in step with him, and we try to get out ahead of him to try to make it happen. But can I tell you, God can make more happen if you just stay linked in partnership with him than you ever could on your own, through your efforts, through your strength. Man, it is not about your strength, but it is all about his grace. See, his grace will give you the ability in your life to do what you otherwise couldn't do. I wonder how many of us in here have been lacking what we need. We've been stressed out because we've been operating out of our own strength. We've forgotten that this is a partnership. We've forgotten that we're in this together with God. And here's the thing about a partnership. A partnership dictates your pace. When you're bound together, when you're working with somebody, walking with somebody, when you're linked to somebody, it's gonna determine your pace, which brings me to the third thing. Once you write this down, if you're taking notes, embrace his pace. Embrace his pace. So you gotta enter his presence, you've gotta engage in this partnership, and then embrace his pace. It's so vitally important that we embrace his pace, because when we embrace his pace, what once felt like striving now feels like striding. What once felt like we were working so hard to move forward, now we do with ease. Why? Because we're just taking steps with him, steps of obedience that his grace and his strength and his power are accompanying us in. But man, if we get out ahead of him, we're working in and of our own strength. I wonder how many times we get the wrong pace and how many times we feel so much pressure because we compare ourselves to other people and we compete with what they're currently doing in their life. See, I think sometimes we can get so caught up in comparison and competing that we miss calling. We miss the calling of God on our lives because we're so busy. And it's easier than ever, is it not? We have social media. At the click of a button, you can find out what everybody else is doing, how shiny and amazing and glamorous their life is, how much they've progressed, how much further along they are than you. And of course it's the 30% that you want them to see. And of course it's just at the right angle with the right filter and everything looks like sheer bliss. It could have been the worst day, but it looks like the best day. And we're comparing and we're feeling all of this pressure, trying to produce something that we were never even called to produce. But I believe that God's saying to us, hey, if you'll slow down, if you'll go, see, there is a pace of grace for your life. And if you'll go at the pace of grace, if you'll just take the steps of obedience that I'm calling you to take every single day, if you'll get in my presence and say, God, what do you want me to do today? he'll tell you, and he'll tell you a step of obedience to take. And if you just focus on that obedience, he'll get you where you need to go. He'll get you where you need to be. See, you don't have to take all of the pressure on yourself to make it happen. You can just trust God, take steps of obedience, and he'll make it happen. See, that takes the pressure off. That takes the pressure off. But sometimes I think it's a trust issue, is it not? Like, we may not actually believe that God is who he said he is and that he can do what he said he would do in our lives, because a lot of times it's the what-abouts that get us hung up. What about money? What about progressing in my career? What about this? What about providing? What about living in that neighborhood that I've always wanted to live in? What about? What about? And I think if the enemy can keep our lives driven by fear and driven by wrong desires, he'll constantly keep us disillusioned, discouraged, and eventually get us defeated, because there is something about when you're trying to fulfill your desires your own way and you stop doing it God's way, that you enter into a state of restlessness instead of rest. But how many of you know when you do things God's way, you go ahead and get his results? And he said in his word that his results are that he would give us rest for our souls. He said, come to me, all you who are weary, all you who are heavy laden. Are you carrying the load? Are you feeling the pressure? You don't need to keep pushing forward. You need to press in to my presence. You need to take on my partnership and take my pace of doing things. Is your pace of doing things? That's what we need to do. It seems simple, but yet in our culture, it's also seems not that simple. It seems really easy, but then we have so many outside things telling us what to do, who to be, what we need to do. And I wonder if our biggest deficit is that we try to open doors for ourselves that God isn't opening. We try to get out ahead of him, and we're trying to push open and press open so many doors that God never opened. And here's the problem with that. If you go at your pace, if you open your own doors, then you have to sustain that. But if you go at God's pace and you allow him to open the doors, then he will sustain you in those places with his strength. See, the Bible tells us that God opens doors that no man can shut. That promotion, it doesn't come from the north, the south, the east, or the west, but promotion comes from God and God alone. Our striving, our doing, our trying, our going after it are nonstop. I wonder if it's all for naught, because God is saying, hey, come with me, take a pause, and I can show you a quicker way. I can show you an easier way. I can show you a way where we're in this together, that you still accomplish all that I've called you to do, and you don't have to deal with half of the weight that you've been carrying. See, I think that there's something about God's way of doing things that it changes everything. See, I believe that God has called us, has a plan for all of us, each of us individually, has a destiny for you, for me. Aren't you thankful today that we serve a God who has a destiny for us? The Bible tells us that he has a book, that all of our days are written in his book. I love that verse. All of our days are written in his book. They were written there before a single day was lived out. Doesn't it make sense that we would begin to pursue the one who actually has the plan in his book? It just makes sense that we would pursue the one but some people aren't in the right chapter. Some people aren't on the right page, and some people aren't even in the right book because they've fallen into the lives of our current culture, that you've got to push it. You've got to press it. You've got to make it happen. And I just want to challenge you in here today that if your dream for your life only affects you, if it only makes a difference in your life, if all of your dreams came true and it only affected you, then it's not a God dream. You need to dream a little bit bigger, because see, the dream of God for your life, the destiny of God for your life, it won't just look like this picture of success that this world paints. It'll look like a life of significance. It'll look like a life that makes a difference in the lives of others, because here's what happens. I start to pursue his presence. I engage in this partnership. I embrace his pace. What does he do? He puts my eyes on people in the place that I'm currently in, that I'm called to reach, that I'm called to minister to. I find purpose now in the place because I know that there are people around me that I'm called to impact. But so often we're so busy chasing our dreams that we fail to actually fulfill the godly desires that he has for our lives, that not only lead to success, because they will, but they'll lead to significance. I believe so often in our culture, we fall in love with this picture, with this facade called success that our world paints out there for us. And that's why we live in this perpetual state of like, well, once I get there, there's this mystical, magical, have you heard of this place? There's this mystical, magical place called there. That once I get there, then I'll be happy. Once I get there, then I'll be content. Once I get there, then I can slow down a little bit. Once I get there, then I'll start to make a difference. I've worked with college students for a long time. If it's college students, they're like, well, once I graduate and get a real job, then my life will actually start. If you're a high school student, it's once I graduate high school and I go to college, that's when life begins. And if we're honest in here today, it's possible to do this in every single season of our lives. And we waste it away in discontentment when God is saying, hey, I have contentment for you. I have satisfaction for you. I have fulfillment for you, but you might not find it where you thought you were gonna find it. It might not be in this facade called success. In fact, it's not in this facade called success. It's found in me. And once you walk step in step and take on my pace, you'll start to see the difference that I can use you to make. See, you'll do things you never imagined that you would do. You'll reach heights in your life that you never imagined you would reach, because you plus God is always better than just you. You plus God, his strength, his empowerment, his ability. See, there is grace for the pace of God for your life. There is grace for the pace. I love in verse 29, it says, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Some of us in here, our life has felt anything but unforced up to this point. It feels like we've had to force it. We've had to claw and bite and scratch and get where we are. Maybe it's time that we get in his presence. Maybe it's time that we realize we're in a partnership and we start to learn from him, start to walk with him, learn those unforced rhythms of grace so it no longer feels like a grind, but our journey feels grace-filled. See, I believe that it's possible to live a grace-filled life. That even though I know people that do way more than other people, but yet they're less tired. Why is that? Because it's not a grind, it's a grace thing. And it's what God's called them to do. And you can't compare yourself and what God wants to do in and through your life to someone else, because you'll always take on things that don't fit you, that weren't meant for you. And maybe they were meant for you in your future, but they weren't meant for you in this season. See, that's why it's so important. Step by step, step by step. I'm walking, I'm led by his Spirit into every step that I take. I don't step. What did Jesus say? I only do what I see my Father do. I only say what my Father says. I walk step in step with my Heavenly Father. See, if Jesus gave us this blueprint and Jesus never seemed rushed and Jesus never seemed restless, wouldn't it make sense that we follow his example and walk the same way? So I believe that when we enter his presence, when we engage in this partnership, and when we go ahead and embrace his pace for our lives, it's then that we experience his peace. Pastor Gerald Brooks, who has been here many times, he said this way, that the peace of God, or the pace of God, it always leads to God's peace. God's pace, it always leads to God's peace. I wonder how many of us need to check our pace. Because I think one of the worst things that can happen, one of the biggest, bummers that could happen, is that we have the peace of God available to us, but we never actually experience it in our own lives because we're too busy copying the culture. instead of being countercultural. We're too busy copying what this world looks like. We're too busy feeling the same pressure that this world feels. And I want to encourage you in here that peace, it's not just for your future. It's not just in the distance. It's not just far off. It's not just once you close out this season and open another season. It's not far off. In fact, peace can be in your present. Maybe for you, you've been restless. You've been tired. This message resonates with you today. You've been tired. You've been worn out. You've been burnt out. You've wondered, man, how can I go on? I'm stressed. I'm exhausted. I believe that Jesus is saying to you today, come to me. If you're weary, if you're tired, come to me. I want to show you how to really, really find rest. I want to show you how to learn the unforced rhythms of my grace. I'm not going to put anything too heavy or ill-fitting on you, but I know exactly what you need right when you need it. I am God. How many of you know this to be true, that the one who created us is the only one who can call us, is the only one who can know what we're called to, what we're called for in each and every season? He is the one that should be at the forefront of our pursuit because he knows the end from the beginning. Maybe it's time that we start to take on a spirit of faith and know, God, like, you know how to handle my life more than I do. I think a lot of peace happens when we just let go of the control of our own lives and we say, God, here I am. I'm open-handed. What do you want me to do? All I want to do is I want to do your will for my life. For some of you, maybe this is a start. Maybe this is the start of your new life, of entering his rest, of not feeling that same burden. If you're in here today and you're feeling that way, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but here's what I want to do. You know who you are. You know what part of the message today resonated with you the most. But either way, I want to pray for you. But before I do, I want to give you the challenge for this week. The challenge for this week is simply this. It's to pursue his presence daily, to enter his presence daily. See, I know this about my own life. When I enter his presence, there's rarely a time that I enter his presence without leaving with something that I need to tweak or change or make a difference in. There's usually not one thing that I don't find God dealing with my heart about. Something that's gonna make this road a little bit easier, make the load a little bit lighter. Something that's gonna make a relationship better. See, I believe in God's presence, you'll get exactly what you need, but you've gotta pursue it. I believe that rest can be found in his presence in this moment, but rest can only be kept by a continual, intentional pursuit of his presence. So that's the challenge. Enter his presence. Enter his presence every single day when you wake up. God, here I am, entering your presence. I want you to use me today. God, I want your perspective on my life, on where I'm at, on my spouse, on my kids. I want your perspective. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for each and every person under the sound of my voice today. God, I thank you that by faith, each and every person that's been dealing with restlessness, that's been stressed out, weighed down, even as we enter a holiday season where they say that stress and lack of rest goes up even more. God, I thank you that there is a supernatural rest that they're able to grab onto and tap into right now in this moment. A supernatural peace that passes all understanding, that transcends any situation that they might be going through. God, help us to know that we are in this life in a partnership with you. God, if there are things about our pace that need to change, we thank you right now that by your Spirit, you reveal those things to us. God, I thank you that each and every person in this place would experience your peace like they never have before. In Jesus' name, everybody that agrees said, amen.
Thanks for watching. If this message helped you, share it with someone you know, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're in the Northeast Ohio area, we'd love to host you for one of our worship experiences. Click the link below for times and locations.